Hello students, welcome to lecture 10. Today's lecture will cover an important topic in machine learning called overfitting. In the previous class, we studied different linear models that can be used for classification. In particular, we asked if linear or logistic regression can help in linear classification tasks. For that, we studied different relationships of error functions and said that linear and logistic regression weights can be used as weight initializer. In addition, we have covered how one can extend binary to multi-class classification tasks. We reviewed two different decomposition techniques for that, one versus one and one versus rest. In today's lecture, we will define what is overfitting and the role of noise and data size which affects overfitting problem, as well as two different types of noise, deterministic and stochastic noise types. We will also discuss how we can deal with overfitting. What are the ways that allows us to prevent overfitting? Let us start with the following example here. We are given 5 points along with a target function in blue. We can see that the target function doesn't exactly fit some of the points, which means that there is some noise involved in the data. For example, this point and this point. And if we were then to use fourth order polynomial, such as in the red one here, to fit these points that were generated by our second order polynomial, target polynomial, we would get a very large out of sample error. However, the in sample error would be very small because fourth order polynomial is flexible enough to fit all the points. Okay, and as we said, the original 5 points contains noise in the data. Let's define the batch generalization. The batch generalization is a case where the model achieves very low in sample error. In our case, a fourth order perfectly fits all the points. However, if you take this fourth order polynomial and test it on left out examples, then the performance will be very bad. In other words, out of sample error will be high. We can say the model cannot generalize to unseen examples well. Even so, its performance was perfect on the given training examples. Generalization is about generalizing the model or the weights underlying the model that was obtained or that were obtained from the training examples to unseen examples, right? So your model, for example, F4, fourth order polynomial, would generalize well if it also achieved a low out of sample error along with low in sample error. But here it's not the case. So the bad generalization is when your model achieves perfect in sample error on training example and bad out of sample error on future unseen test examples. Let's now try to give a definition of overfitting, which is today's main topic. One way to explain the overfitting is to consider the act of using hypotheses with more complexity than it is needed to solve problem at your hand. The overfitting is a term which we can use to express that the complexity of hypothesis when past a desirable complexity. Okay? For example, we can define it in terms of the VC dimension. Take a hypothesis, any hypothesis, as an example, with a VC dimension equal to 1126 for learning. Okay? And then the batch generalization would be the case where the out of sample and the in sample error difference is large. The optimal hypothesis and its complexity is indicated with a proper complexity of VC dimension, as shown in this graph. Okay, so we have error, model complexity, represented in terms of VC dimension. If we switch from dV star, which means the optimal VC dimension, to 1126, which is much higher, then we can see the in sample error goes down and out of sample error starts to increase. they start in sample and out of sample error start to diverge. We can call that the model overfits if we observe in sample error going down, but out of sample error is going up. So this is the point where two start diverging, in sample error and out of sample error. And we can call this region as overfitting region. And we also have the model complexity that we can use to characterize the model that we're using. So 1126 is a powerful model if we interpret it in terms of VC dimension and the degrees of freedom of this hypothesis class. So in contrast, we have another phenomenon called underfitting. Okay, the underfitting is where we use a model with restricted complexity. So this region, okay, the region when the VC is located in this, both in sample error and out of sample error is high. All right, so underfitting region, overfitting region. Well, the bad generalization, again, is a case where in sample is low, out of sample is high in general. And the overfitting is where in sample gets lower, out of sample gets higher, or the difference between them starts increasing. So bad generalization and overfitting somehow related, but the overfitting is when you fit the data more than needed. It's actually a comparative term we can use to express that a solution in terms of in-sample error when past a desirable point when it comes to fitting the hypothesis more than another solution, where the different solution can be different instances within the same model or different models. Okay, for example, given the following points, if you had a third order or second order polynomial instead, one would not have achieved in sample to be 0. However, we can expect that out of sample would have been considerably less. So graphically we can see fourth order polynomial overfits, but if we had chosen third or second order polynomial, we would achieve good fit. And in that case, fourth order solution could have been considered as overfitting compared to third or second order solution. All right? There is a distinction between overfitting and just plain bad generalization. Okay, there are different causes of overfitting. Let's consider main ones below and try to explain them in terms of driving analogy to understand it better. We have learning and driving. So in machine learning, overfitting can be explained in driving as committing a car accident. Okay, in machine learning, overfitting happens if you use a hypothesis with very excessive VC dimension than required, or very powerful. Okay, in this case, the original target function is second order polynomial, but we're using quite more powerful hypothesis, which is fourth order to fit. So excessive DVC or VC dimension than needed. In human driving, so excessive use of VC dimension can be related to driving too fast. Some other causes of overfitting are due to noise and limited data size that we have for selecting our hypothesis, which can be related to driving on a bumpy road, okay, noisy road. And when we limited data size is similar to limited observation about the road conditions. So bumpy road, limited observation about road conditions can lead to a car accident, and if you drive too fast. While these examples give some sense of understanding the overfitting problem, let us delve into more details of how the role of noise and data size affect the overfitting, as we haven't discussed them yet. But before, let's take a look at this fun time quiz. Based on the previous discussion, for data of fixed size, which of the following situations is relatively of lowest risk of overfitting? Think about it. So first, small noise fitting from small DVC to median DVC, okay, VC dimension. Small noise fitting from small VC to large. We have large noise fitting from small to median. Large noise fitting from small to large VC. Which one of them is correct? Take your time and think about it. The correct answer out of 4 would be the first one. The two main causes of overfitting are noise and excessive VC or power of your selected hypothesis. If those two are under control, we control the risk of overfit. So small noise, second answer would not fit because even so we have small noise, but we are considering large VC. Large noise doesn't work. So we need to have small noise and small VC under our control to avoid possible overfitting. The main cause for overfitting is fitting the noise in data, which we said is a natural side effect of fitting the data, right? Fitting the noise is harmful because the learning algorithm is trying to find the hypothesis from data and some metric in sample error, which tries to detect a pattern. And if you learn a hypothesis from noisy data, the out-of-sample error will be bad as it tries to extrapolate from the in-sample noise. Okay, so let's consider two different target functions as shown here, with accompanying data points generated by these targets. First one is on the left is a simpler 10th order polynomial, but has noise involved. Okay, so noisy low order target. The noisy patterns can be seen. The blue is 10th order polynomial, and all the points that doesn't lie on the blue line is considered noise. These are the noise. Here on the right hand side, okay, we have 50th order target, noiseless. Okay, so noiseless high order target function. So noiseless because our target function passed through all the examples perfectly. Okay, 50th order is quite complex, powerful polynomial. Now we can try to model both target functions using two models, second order and 10th order polynomial. And we can get different results. Those results can help us to analyze which one of the hypotheses overfits the data, second order polynomial or 10th order polynomial. So let me repeat the task again. We have two different cases. First is 10th order target function generated these data points. Okay, 15 data points, which are noisy. And then 50th order target function, noiseless. All the data have been generated by some fixed target function, noiseless. Now we want to see how G2 and G10 performs, whether they overfit or underfit, given these two cases. So now once we train our second order and 10th order polynomial on the data points that was generated by 10th order target plus noise and 50th order polynomial noiseless, we obtain the following hypothesis. Okay, this is the 10th order polynomial fit on the data that has been generated by 10th order target function, which is noisy. And we see here in orange curve, it is a second order fit. Okay, so second order fit looks restricted. Also, similarly here, we take the 10th order polynomial and try to fit the data that has been generated by 50th order target function, which we said noiseless. And similarly, second order polynomial, we fit on those data points. First, let's take a look at the performance of second and 10th order polynomials as shown on the left side here in terms of in-sample error and out-of-sample error. Those fits are shown again in orange and red. We notice that in-sample error for second order polynomial is quite low, 0.05. Okay? However, the 10th order polynomial achieves better in-sample error, which is 0.034, much smaller than the second order, okay, in terms of in-sample error. However, if you look at out-of-sample error performance of G2, second order polynomial, and 10th order polynomial, we see that G2 achieves small, 0.127. However, G10, 10th order, achieves much higher out-of-sample error, which is worse in comparison to second order polynomial. The error measures here clearly show that 10th order polynomial fit is a case of overfitting. Why? Since in sample and an out-of-sample error diverge a lot, which shows the sign of fitting the noise. Okay, the tensor order fits the noise in the data. For example, this point is noise. Okay, tries to bend and tries to capture all the noise points by minimizing mean squared error, as tensor order has more flexibility, more high parameters to be tuned. And VC of tensor order is also higher than second order, while second order polynomial is restricted, so it doesn't have flexibility to capture this variability, these points. We can say that tensor order is overfitting. How about this case? So we had data points generated by 50th order target function, and we fit second order and tensor order polynomial. The in-sample error of second order polynomial is okay, it's 0.29, not that bad. However, the in-sample of tensor order polynomial is very small, very good, almost zero. Okay, look, the tensor order tries to fit all the data points, passing through all. Okay, however, the out-of-sample error of second order and then tensor order, if we compare the tensor order, is quite high, is very high. Okay, look, in this case also we have overfitting problem. So tensor order is overfitting. In sample is very different from out of sample. The difference is huge. This is clearly another case of overfitting again, because the target function actually does have noise. Okay, but this is not the usual kind of noise as in this case. Let's talk about the irony of two learners, second order polynomial and tensor order polynomial, in trying to fit the data generated by tensor order polynomial plus noise. So in the case of tensor order target, we can think of the second order fit as a learner which is restricted, and then the tensor order fit as a overfit. We can say that the overfit chose tensor order polynomial because it knew that the target was tensor order polynomial. On the other hand, the second order polynomial or the restrict chose G2 second order because it considered the number of points available in the training set is equal to 15. Right? So choosing the second order polynomial provides only 3 parameters, such that the ratio of points, which is 15, to degrees, which is 3, degrees of freedom of second order polynomial is 5 to 1. So here we're pushing our luck, since we know that the rule of thumb for it to be is 10 to 1, right? But we do so because we figure we can't use simple line when we know that target is the tensor order polynomial. This means, or reinforces the guideline, that we're trying to match the data resources rather than the target complexity when we use restricted. So restricted hypothesis in general wins in terms of the out of sample error a lot. Okay, however, the overfit hypothesis is good in terms of in sample error. Let's try to visualize the second order and tensor order polynomials. Try to give a pictorial example and define the region of overfitting. Visualize their out of sample or expected error performance. On the left hand side, we see second order polynomial with corresponding in sample and out of sample performance. The straight line here, this line here, is a target performance. So just think of it as an ideal performance. We have error, expected error, and number of data points. H2, the class of second order hypothesis or polynomials, is restricted. Therefore, the in-sample error is higher, along with out-of-sample error. In this case, the overfit region corresponds to the gray area, where the difference between in-sample and out-of-sample is significant. However, as the number of data points increase, both approach each other, but generally the in-sample error remains higher for second-order polynomials, or restricted class of polynomials. On the right-hand side here, we see the performance of tensor order polynomial, similar in terms of in-sample error and out-of-sample error. Okay, the gray region shows the overfitting region, where in-sample, out-of-sample error diverge. So comparing second order to tensor order polynomial, we can see that the tensor order polynomial overfits effect is much higher in general. However, tensor order achieves lower in-sample error when the training number of data points increase or goes to infinity or here. Here it's very important to note that the restricted always wins in out of sample error when we have limited amount of training data. While models more complexity, they need more data for achieving small in sample error and out of sample error, and then minimizing possible overfitting. Now let's consider the no noise case. In other words, our target function is 50th order polynomial that are generating the following data, and we fit those data using second order polynomial and 10th order polynomial. And we observe in this case that the overfit learner picks 10th order polynomial and tries to fit all the data, while restricted learner, second order polynomial, performs bad in terms of in-sample error. However, the out-of-sample error is still better. So what happens? This is ideal case, no noise case, and target function is 50th order polynomial. And when we fit 10th order polynomial, we should not be overfitting. However, as we have seen, the restricted second order polynomial still wins in terms of out-of-sample error. So the question is there really no noise? Well, in this case, target complexity acts like a noise. It can be explained as a different type of noise that is leading to overfitting. Let's take a look at this. When having limited data, in which of the following case would learner restricted perform better than overfit? When second order would perform better than 10th order. There are 4 cases: limited data, 10th order target function with noise, limited data, 1126 order target function with no noise, limited data, third option, 1126 order target function with some noise. Fourth option is all of the above. So the correct answer is all of the above. In all of the cases, the restricted hypothesis would perform better than the model with higher complexity. The first case is clear, we discussed that, 10th order target plus noise. Second one is, limited data plus a very highly complex hypothesis with no noise will lead to overfitting. R still performs well. Limited data, high complex model plus noise definitely leads to overfitting, so we need to use model with restricted complexity. So all of the above cases is true. To further analyze the role of noise in overfitting, let's conduct a simple experiment, which will help us to observe the effects of overfitting. Specifically, we want to observe the impact of noise, level, and target complexity. We said target complexity acts as different kind of noise, as different type of noise. Let us consider general target function, f of x, plus some added noise, Gaussian IID noise, with some variance level. The level of noise is denoted by sigma. This is a higher order of polynomial, target complexity polynomial. We normalize this polynomial quantity with alpha, so that the energy is always 1. Since we want to observe signal to noise ratio, that we can definitely say that sigma, or the variance, is really the amount of noise. Here the function doesn't generate very interesting polynomials, so we will instead use coefficient of so-called Legendre polynomials, alphas, which are simply polynomials with specific coefficients, such that from one order to the next they are orthogonal to each other. So second order, third, or fourth order, they are all orthogonal, those coefficients, which is similar to harmonics of sinusoidal expansion. Once this noise is added, the polynomial formed will be more interesting to investigate. And those factors that seem affect overfitting will be the noise level, which is sigma, and target complexity, which we called as QF. And we also have size of the data we can see. Now, let's do this experiment and analyze overfit level for different noise and target complexity. Let's first talk about the overfit measure. We fit the data set in this example using 2 models, H2 or G2 and G10, second order polynomials and tenth order polynomials. And we know that each model yields a hypothesis function, okay, which is G2 and G10. We can call the overfit measure, or we can define the overfit measure as a difference between out of sample error for more complex model, in this case 10th order polynomial, and out of sample error for simpler model, G2, second order polynomial. These can work because if more complex model is overfitting, its out of sample error will be bigger, right? Which results a large or larger positive number. Okay. Instead, if the measure yields results in a negative large number, then it shows that the complex model is not overfitting as a result of this difference, because it is performing better than the simpler model. So we select this as our overfit measures, the difference between the complex model and simpler model in terms of their out of sample error performance. If we run an experiment for tens of millions of iteration, the complete runs, right? The following plots can be generated, okay, which shows the impact of noise and target complexity on the overfit measure based on the data size. Okay. In the first case, we see that the target complexity here is fixed as to be the 20th order polynomial, and the noise level in the data is changed or varied. The red region here corresponds to the overfit region, while blue region is non-overfit region, right? So as we can see here, as the noise level goes up, it is expected that our target function, our 20th order function, target polynomial, starts overfitting. Well, in this case, we select the target complexity as parameter and vary it to analyze the impact of target complexity versus n on overfitting, while setting the noise level into data to be 0.1. The red region here again corresponds to the region of overfitting, while blue, again, non-overfit. This is transitioning region. One of the main messages we can extract from this result is that there seems to be another factor aside from conventional noise that affects overfitting. Okay, the truth is, however, that the noise measured here on the left image is called stochastic noise. It is a more conventional noise. So stochastic or random noise related to data, right? Data generation. How about this right-hand side image? We can call it as deterministic noise, just to relate it to the target complexity here, as it also affects overfitting. Here, the effect observed seems to be related to an increase in complexity that brings about a higher overfit measure, which is caused by deterministic noise. Okay, so we can derive 4 main reasons for series overfitting based on these graphs, or the results of this experiment, right? So first, if we have limited amount of training data, we are prone to overfitting here. Okay, so more data, less overfitting. Stochastic noise is higher. If it goes up, then more overfitting can happen. And if deterministic noise is high, or target complexity is higher, then we also may overfit. Similarly, excessive power. If you use your hypothesis with higher complexity, we can easily overfit. These are 4 main reasons of overfitting. The deterministic noise is a part of the target function that the best hypothesis function h that we select from data cannot capture. Okay, in this graph, h is selected from the data h star, and then the target function is shown by the following function in blue curve. This is why we have a hypothesis set and a part of target function that we cannot capture, this shaded area. And there is no point in trying to capture it because we would be detecting a false pattern, which we cannot extrapolate, right, given the limitation of our hypothesis set. So deterministic noise is different from stochastic noise in that it depends on hypothesis set, the class of functions you are dealing with, for the same target function. Using a more sophisticated hypothesis set may decrease the deterministic noise, okay? And also note that it's for a fixed point example. When we have finite n set of data, we gain the unfortunate ability to fit the noise, be it stochastic or deterministic, which wouldn't be possible if we had an infinite size set. If we revisit our driving analogy, we can show some simple rules that we can consider to avoid overfitting or committing a car accident. So first, we should drive slowly, okay, to avoid committing car accident, and exploit more road information, put the brakes, and monitor dashboard. These are some of the things that we may follow to avoid car accident. In learning, we must start from simpler model, okay, to avoid overfitting. Or consider cleaning or pruning the data if your data is noisy, or data hinting, okay, regularization, so putting the brake, the validation. So far, we know that we should start from simpler model. The techniques such as regularization and then validation will be the main topics of the upcoming lectures, which will combat overfitting. What about data cleaning, hinting? Right? Let's briefly talk about it. Before applying your data to a learning algorithm, you can perform some visual data inspection. For instance, if you take these given examples of digits, handwritten digits, we can see that there is an outlier, which is somewhere here, outlier 5, at the top, which is very close to blue class, but far from red class. So to correct this outlier, there are two options. First, we correct the label of this outlier. Well, this is called as data cleaning. So we can label them as blue class, or just remove the example, okay? Because this is just one example, we will not lose much. So that is called as data pruning, okay? So data cleaning and pruning techniques may help, but the effect varies on the final hypothesis, selecting the final hypothesis. Sometimes such outliers can be useful when the amount of data is huge and sufficient. What about data hinting? So briefly, you may observe some slightly shifted, rotated digits in your data, which carries same meaning, right? So the possible action to correct those rotated shifted digits may be adding virtual examples by manually shifting and rotating. This action is called data hinting, okay? It may help, but watch out. Virtual examples are not generated, cannot be assumed independently identically generated because there is a human intervention. In today's lecture, we defined what is overfitting. The overfitting is the case when we have lower in-sample error, but higher out-of-sample error. Right? Our overfitting also is a little bit different from generalization, bad generalization. That's what we discussed. In bad generalization, we have low in-sample and high out-of-sample error. And we discussed the role of noise and data size that affects overfitting. There are two different types of noise, deterministic and then stochastic noise that we have discussed. We briefly talked about dealing with overfitting, such as data cleaning, pruning, hinting, but the main techniques will be discussed in the coming lectures. which we call it as regularization. That's it for today. See you later.